America's vast landscape is full of hope and freedom, but also of dark and terrible secrets, chilling forgotten fears, and terrifying shadows that haunt your soul. These stories will show you the nightmares behind the American dream. Get ready to open the door to a nightmare you won't wake up from. 1. The Second Voice from Home, Wisconsin, 2003. If you live alone in a house, and in the dead of night you hear a voice whispering to you from the kitchen, who does that voice really belong to? After Lisa Holloway's divorce, she and her son moved home to an old farmhouse in rural Wisconsin to start a new life. The house hadn't been lived in for years. From the outside it looked like an ordinary house, but inside it was full of secrets. Lisa's biggest concern was for her son's safety and a quiet life. But their new home was much more than she expected. For the first few days, apart from the wind rattling the wooden doors and the natural sounds of the old house, nothing unusual happened. But on the third night, at exactly 2:46 a.m., everything changed in the house. Lisa suddenly awoke from her sleep, frightened. "Mommy," she whispered in a thin but clear voice, breaking the silence. Lisa got up and quietly got out of bed. The Fey-Wee-Dee voice had come from the kitchen. Her heart raced as she made her way down the dimly lit hallway. When she reached the kitchen, she saw that the cabinet door under the sink was slightly ajar. But now she was alone in the kitchen, and she was sure that her son was asleep in his room. When she woke him up the next morning, he said he hadn't heard anything. Maybe it was a dream, Lisa tried to convince herself. But the next night it happened again. And every night, at exactly the same time. One night, although frightened, he went into the room where he thought he heard the voice. This time it wasn't just "Mommy." Lisa tried to understand it, and it was also saying, "Find me." Suddenly a cold wind blew through the kitchen, and Lisa felt goosebumps. "This is an old place. I'm exaggerating my feelings," she began to think. But her feelings about it never diminished. But then, as the night wore on, other sounds began to take over. The creaking of the boards, the footsteps on the stairs, the creepy sound of something strange dragging around the house. One night Lisa decided to record these sounds on her tape recorder. She put an old tape recorder under the kitchen cupboard and didn't sleep that night. When she listened to the recordings in the morning, she felt really shocked. First came her son's whisper, "Mommy, come into the kitchen." But that was not all. Then came a quiet, high-pitched whisper, "There's someone else with you." At that moment, Lisa realized she was not alone. She contacted the police, but no one was home. The doors were locked and the windows were intact. There were no traces inside the house. After weeks of living in that house with that fear, Lisa decided to move out. Before leaving the house, she waited for the same time again last night. At 2:46 a.m., a whisper was heard from every corner of the house. "Don't go, stay together." The next morning, Lisa and her son went out of the house. The new tenants said they heard the same noises at night. The whispers could be heard from every room and every part of the house. Now that farmhouse is empty. Neighbors say they hear creepy shadows coming through the windows of the house at night, and even the terrible sobs of a child. No one goes to that house. If you are alone in the house and someone is calling you, it may not be your voice. In the terrible silence of the night, and you hear your loved one whispering to you, take a moment and hold your breath before you answer. Even the most trusted voice can sometimes have skeletons in its closet. 2. The Boy Lost in the Shadows, Ohio, 1996. A mother who saw her son in the park turned her back and never saw him again. It was the summer of 1996. Helen Matthews was in a small, quiet town in Ohio with her 7-year-old son Jake. They were at the playground. The sun was beginning to set and the wind was gently rustling the leaves of the trees. Jake was running around like crazy, chasing a small blue soccer ball. When Helen checked her phone, her son had disappeared. At first she had only seen Jake running in the shadows. But in a moment of absent-mindedness, Jake blended into a meaningless shadow and then disappeared. Helen looked around, completely panicked. She started to shout, but her voice didn't echo. There was no one left in the park. Then she realized there was something moving behind the trees in the dark forest of the park. But he was afraid to look. His heart was beating faster than ever. It was as if time, which had been flowing, had stopped. Helicopters, police and NGOs searched for Jake for hours. They searched every dark corner of the forest and the park, but there was no sign. It was as if the lost boy had been swallowed up. Helen's life changed forever. She couldn't sleep at night and would hear her son's voice in her dreams. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard a small voice whispering quietly from the corner, "Mommy, I'm here." But there was no one in the room. There were only shadows. One night he was looking out the window and saw a shadow in the darkness outside. The shadow looked like Jake's silhouette, but without his face. They seemed to lock eyes, but the shadow suddenly disappeared. The locals started to see strange things in the park where Jake had disappeared. People walking through the park in the deserted hours of the night said they heard children's voices in the trees. But no children were ever seen to be there. Some people thought the missing children were living in the shadows. Others said that in the darkness of those woods, something could never find peace. Helen always felt the pain of losing her son and never forgot it. But what she feared most was that something else might be with Jake, a dark, silent, invisible presence. Sometimes, at night, when it gets quiet, you can hear something quiet coming from that shadow. "Mom, find me." But will this call save her? Or will she be dragged deeper into the darkness? If you see a shadow disappearing into the darkness, never approach it. Because some losses are not only human. 3. Last night at the rental house, Texas, 2011. Can you imagine a scary house where everyone who enters stays only one night? In a small town in Texas, a college student named Sarah and 3 friends rented a cheap house. The outside of the house was old enough to be a ruin. The windows were worn out and the door creaked a little. But they liked the fact that it was close to the city center, not too expensive, and the rooms were nice and spacious. The first day everything was normal, just the excitement and tiredness of moving in. Then in the evening something creepy started to happen in the house. First, small things happened. The light bulb in the ceiling flickered for a second, then the old wooden floor creaked senselessly along the hallway. Doors opened slowly and creaked shut on their own. "That's what old houses are like," her friend said. But Sarah was scared out of her wits. By midnight, everyone was fast asleep. Sarah woke up wide awake and went to the kitchen when she felt a cold breeze on her neck. The room was suddenly freezing. Frightening whispers came through the walls, but they were very quiet and hard to understand. They were also quite eerie. Then, all of a sudden, the kitchen door slammed shut. The next day, Sarah stayed home alone while her friends went out. There was no phone signal, so she couldn't communicate with anyone outside. She felt as if she was being watched by someone who had just come in. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw a black shadow at the end of the hallway. The shadow was moving towards her, but it had no face. Sarah was no longer alone with this fear and tried to leave, but the doors were locked. When she looked out of the window, she saw that the garden was empty and she could see no one. It was as if the outside world was trapped inside the house. Later, that night the lights went out. Inside the house, which was completely dark, Sarah took deep breaths. There were other sounds in the darkness besides breathing. She could hear creepy footsteps approaching and felt as if someone was watching her. Finally, Sarah went down to the basement. The stairs were very old and every step was almost cracked. In the darkest corner of the basement, in front of an old mirror, she stopped to look at herself. Was that where she was making the biggest mistake? What she saw in the mirror was not her reflection. A horrible face, a creature without eyes, was staring at Sarah. She tried to run away in fear, but the house had suddenly turned into a maze. Doors were closing fast, one after the other. It was as if the house wouldn't let her go. In the morning, her friends came back to the house terrified, but Sarah wasn't there. All that was left were her own belongings that she had left behind. The security cameras that were recording didn't show what had happened that night. It was as if the house had swallowed everything that happened that night and wouldn't let anyone find out. If you come across a house like this, remember, some houses open their doors once and never let you go. 4. The Hotel That Time Forgot, New Orleans, 1987. Those who spend the night here will not see the morning, because time stops in this hotel. On a dark, desolate, and stormy autumn night in 1987, there was a mysterious and eerie hotel in one of the old, abandoned neighborhoods of New Orleans. The Marrow Inn. From the outside, it looked ruined and about to collapse. It was rusted all over, its walls and windows broken. People said the hotel was cursed, and that anyone who stayed there was haunted by the passage of time. Journalist Mark Evans decided to spend the night in the hotel to investigate these legends and find out if they were true. When he entered, he was surprised by the old furniture, dusty curtains, and eerie atmosphere. There was a strange silence in the hotel. It was completely silent, as if all the walls were watching Mark. At first, everything seemed normal. Mark walked through the dusty hotel corridors with a small flashlight. But as the hours passed, he began to notice some strange changes in his surroundings. The corridors were a little different from what he remembered at first. The rooms were mixed up. He was going out the same door and back into the same corridor. This made Mark very uneasy. Later that night, the clock on Mark's phone suddenly stopped working. He was completely cut off from the outside world. When he looked out the window, he saw that the streets of New Orleans were just like they had been the night before, with people doing it all over again. Nothing was moving. It was as if time had stopped. Suddenly, the sound of an old piano came from his room. The notes were very pathetic and sad. Mark followed the sound down the hall and knocked on the door. But when he opened the door, no one was there. He could feel his teeth grinding. Most eerie were the ghosts of the other guests in the hotel. The spirits of people who had stayed here years ago and never left were said to be ghosts. Their eyes were hollow and their bodies translucent. Mark tried to converse with them, but they didn't say a word. He was slowly realizing that time was a trap in the dark maze he had fallen into, searching for the exit door. The longer they stayed there, the more likely they were to get trapped in the hotel. As he tried to escape, the corridors and doors changed shape, moving as if the hotel was alive and would not let him out. Moving out of eye when he realized that he would not live to see the morning, he felt fear descend upon him. It was as if time had stopped there, and he didn't want to leave it there. Mark never walked out of that hotel again. If you see an old hotel on the streets of New Orleans, think carefully before you go inside. At the Marrow Inn, time is the cruelest guardian, and it will never let you go. 5. Hunters Lost in the Misty Woods, Maine, 2004. When the fog settled, those chilling screams from deep in the forest were never heard again. It was a cold, misty, and chilling fall evening in 2004. The dense forests of Maine were covered with huge tree trunks and a thick layer of fog that rose in places. 3 best friends, Tom, Mike, and Lisa, had gone out into the wilderness to camp for a few days. They were looking for adventure, but they didn't know that the forest was watching them closely. On the first day, everything was fine. They were laughing and hunting around the campfire. But then the weather changed overnight. As the sun set, a thick fog quickly descended over the forest. The fog was so thick it was like a thin curtain, and they could see almost nothing. Tom said he saw dark beings moving in the fog. Mike and Lisa paid no attention at first, but as the night wore on, they began to hear strange whispers in the mist. It was like a terrible warning from the depths of the forest. When they looked back at the campsite at midnight, Mike and Lisa realized that Tom was missing. In panic and fear, they began to look for him, but the fog swallowed everything. Sounds were muffled and the forest became pitch black. The leaves rustled beneath their feet with every step, but the fog made it difficult to get their bearings. In the morning, a truly horrifying sight was revealed. Tom's clothes were torn to shreds and his footprints were all over the place in a strangely irregular pattern, and to be honest, they ended in the woods in a rather frightening way. But Tom was still missing. As Lisa and Mike went deeper into the forest to find their friend, they began to find strange symbols and traces of ancient tribes. The mystery of the forest deepened and the whispers in the air became maddening. The whispers were getting closer and closer. Many hunters and campers who had spent months fighting in the jungle had disappeared into the fog. They were aware of this. As night fell, the fog grew thicker. From the remotest and darkest corners of the forest came wheezing, muffled screams, lost in the cries of fear. Lisa ended her growing despair by finding a hut in the fog. The door of the hut was slightly open, and icy cold air was coming from inside. Inside the hut, on the floor, were the bloody and torn belongings of her friends. Lisa could feel fear coursing through her veins like ice, as she had extreme difficulty breathing in the hut. The fog began to surround her, as if dark shadows were moving around her. She wanted to run away, but the fog was swallowing her. The last thing he saw were quiet, meaningless whispers coming from the depths of the forest. Then he couldn't say anything for a while. We searched the forest for weeks, but there was no sign of the hunters or their tracks. The locals always said that the foggy forest was cursed and would silently swallow anyone who entered. Some people said that those who had gone missing were still trapped in the forest, struggling to get out of the fog. When the forest is covered in fog, be careful. You know, when you are lost, it is as if you have left your body and soul in the dark forest. 6. The Curse of the Black Widow, Chicago, 1929. A mysterious woman who appeared in the darkness and never left her victims. Those who encountered her could never escape. The cold and foggy Chicago nights of 1929 were the scene of a dark legend that haunted the city's residents. Then, out of nowhere, this mysterious woman known as the Black Widow appeared in the fall. Her presence was the greatest fear of those who walked the streets alone, and the greatest fear of those who braved the night. The Black Widow walked around the city wearing a long black dress and a black veil that completely covered her face. Those who met her always said the same thing: a cold and blank stare, a silent but deadly pursuit, and then a sudden meaningless disappearance. Sometimes it was said she would look out of the windows of her victims' houses and see red glowing eyes staring back at her. There's a terrible legend that the Black Widow's soul was cursed after a great betrayal in her past. Her thirst for revenge consumed not only her flesh and blood, but also her mind and soul. His victims were single people who lived alone and walked the streets alone at night. Their fears, chilling emotions, and dark thoughts were the Black Widow's food. According to police records, between 1929 and 1933, Chicago saw a spike in mysterious disappearances and deaths. The only things we found in the crime scenes were thin black cobwebs and a feathery black feather. But the police couldn't figure out what these symbols meant and never caught the culprit. James Miller, a young and ambitious detective, is the only one who can solve this mystery and is assigned to do so. As he investigates the case, he realizes that the Black Widow's trail leads to the darkest, most abandoned, and forgotten parts of the city. One night, he summoned all his courage and decided that enough was enough. He made a decision to follow her. That night, the city held its breath. The flickering lights of the street lamps flickered and flickered like pale ghosts in the fog. When James saw the Black Widow, he realized that her movements were supernatural. She didn't say a word as she moved like a shadow, superhumanly fast, and able to disappear and reappear at any moment. When he felt her cold breath on the back of his neck, his heart began to race with fear. When they looked into each other's eyes, the red glow in those dark eyes made James feel very scared. It was as if the Black Widow was whispering in his ear and voicing his deepest fears. From that moment on, James' mind became a little fuzzy. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. He began to have dreams about the Black Widow, had trouble sleeping, and felt like a madman. Eventually, he was found delirious in the police station, with no memory of what happened, where he was, or how he got there. She is now part of the Black Widow's curse. He couldn't control his thoughts. He didn't know what he was doing. He was in a fog, cut off from reality. Her story has become a new legend in the city. The Black Widow's curse haunts her victims and traps them in a dark eternity. If you are out at night and you feel someone following you, don't look back. The Black Widow has already chosen you and is pulling you into the darkness. Take a peek into the dark corners of the room as these stories reach your ears. Maybe America's dark past is not just a thing of the past, but something still living and breathing. I think as you listened to these stories, you felt a little closer to you. If you love this chilling journey, you will love the next one. Keep scrolling through our channel for more true horror stories, each one lived, each one full of terror. Listen, close your eyes and relax, but don't think you are completely out of danger. Some stories are not just told, they are lived. See you in the new videos. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and go deeper into the darkness with us.